The scent of bitter espresso and leather polish hung in the air like an unspoken warning. I adjusted the stack of documents in my arms, the weight of them pressing against my ribs as I navigated the polished marble corridor toward Nico's office. 2 years I'd worked here. 2 years of maintaining the perfect facade of professional detachment in a building where every surface gleamed, and every shadow concealed something darker than corporate secrets. My fingers traced the edge of the manila folder absently, a nervous habit I'd developed during my first week, when I realized the conglomerate's legitimate real estate holdings were merely pretty wrapping paper on a very different kind of package. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in sharp relief, making the pristine white walls feel clinical, sterile. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows lining the hallway, the city sprawled below us like a kingdom, and somewhere in this glass tower, Nico Salvatore ruled it with calculated precision. I could hear the low murmur of voices as I approached his office, the heavy door slightly ajar. My sensible heels clicked softly against the floor, a measured rhythm I'd perfected to announce my presence without seeming intrusive. The air conditioning hummed steadily, raising goosebumps along my arms beneath the silk blouse I'd paired with tailored black slacks, my usual armor of professionalism. "The quarterly reports, Mr. Salvatore." I practiced under my breath, rehearsing the neutral tone I'd use. 2 years of working as his executive assistant had taught me that emotion was a liability here, that maintaining distance was survival. I'd watched 3 assistants before me crack under the pressure of his intensity, the weight of what we all pretended not to know. Through the gap in the door, I could see him at his desk, dark hair perfectly styled, the crisp lines of his navy suit jacket emphasizing broad shoulders that spoke of controlled power. At 31, Nico had built an empire that operated in the gray spaces between legal and lethal, and I'd learned to navigate those spaces by becoming invisible, efficient, forgettable. I pushed the door open wider, stepping into his domain. The office was exactly as it always was, minimalist and imposing, with that massive mahogany desk positioned to command the room. Behind him, the window framed the skyline, making him appear even more untouchable against the backdrop of his conquered territory. "Mr. Salvatore, the quarterly reports you requested," I said, approaching the desk with measured steps. I kept my eyes on the documents, not on the way his jaw tensed slightly as he reviewed something on his laptop, not on the single silver ring on his right hand that caught the light when he moved. He glanced up briefly, those dark eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched, sweeping over me with the same detached assessment he gave every piece of data that crossed his desk. "Leave them here, Mia." The use of my first name was rare enough to make my heart skip, though I showed no reaction. I set the stack down precisely in the designated corner of his desk, the one kept clear for incoming priority items. The leather portfolio containing the most sensitive financial documents went on top, its brass clasp glinting. "Will you need anything else before I leave for the day?" I asked, already mentally preparing for my actual plans. The dinner reservation I'd made at the Italian place near my apartment, the navy dress hanging in my closet that I'd finally have an excuse to wear. "No." His attention had already returned to his screen, dismissing me with characteristic efficiency. I was halfway to the door when Margaret's voice carried from the outer office, bright and thoughtless in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. "Oh, Mia's heading out early tonight," she announced to whoever was listening, her tone carrying that particular enthusiasm of someone sharing harmless gossip. "She has a date. First one in months, apparently." The words hung in the air like smoke before a fire alarm. I froze, my hand still reaching for the doorknob, every muscle in my body suddenly aware of the shift in atmosphere behind me. The steady tap of Nico's fingers on his keyboard had stopped. The silence that followed Margaret's announcement was absolute, suffocating. I heard the scrape of his chair against the floor, the quiet rustle of expensive fabric as he stood. My pulse hammered in my throat as I forced myself to turn around, to face whatever reaction I'd inadvertently triggered. Nico stood behind his desk, perfectly still except for the slight tension in his jaw, a muscle jumping beneath tanned skin. His eyes, usually so carefully neutral when they looked at me, had gone dark in a way that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows behind him cast his face in partial shadow, making it impossible to fully read his expression. "A date," he repeated, his voice soft, controlled in a way that sent warning signals racing down my spine. It was the tone he used during negotiations when someone had made a grave miscalculation. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze with practiced calm even as my heart raced. "Yes, Mr. Salvatore, a dinner reservation at 7:30. He moved then, coming around the desk with deliberate slowness, each step measured and purposeful. I'd seen him move like this before, when circling a business opponent, when preparing to strike. The space between us diminished with each footfall, until he stood close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. "You're not going anywhere." The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. His hand reached out, fingers closing around my wrist, not painfully, but with unmistakable possession. The heat of his palm against my skin sent unwelcome electricity racing up my arm. I looked down at where he held me, then back up at his face, forcing my expression to remain neutral, even as something dangerous and unwanted coiled in my stomach. "I'm fairly certain my personal time is my own, Mr. Salvatore. Not tonight." His thumb pressed against my pulse point, and I knew he could feel how fast my heart was beating, that my body was betraying the calm I projected. "Cancel it." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it, sharp and disbelieving. "You're joking." Hey, do I look like I'm joking? The question held an edge, his eyes searching my face with an intensity I'd never experienced from him before. Not in 2 years of working side by side, not in countless late nights alone in this office. "You look like you've forgotten which century we're in," I replied, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I attempted to pull my wrist free, but his grip tightened fractionally. "I don't need your permission to have a social life. You do when it interferes with work." The excuse sounded hollow even as he said it, and we both knew it. "There's nothing on the calendar that requires my presence tonight." I kept my tone professional, clinical, the same voice I used to present quarterly reports. "Unless you're suddenly in need of an assistant at 7:30 on a Friday evening." Something flickered across his face, an emotion I couldn't quite name. Frustration, perhaps, or something more dangerous. His other hand came up, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, close enough to be a threat or a promise. "Who is he?" The question came out rough, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained. "None of your business." I met his gaze squarely, refusing to be intimidated even as my pulse raced beneath his fingers. "Just as your personal life is none of mine. Everything about you is my business, Mia." He said my name like a claim, like ownership, and something in his expression had shifted from controlled to barely restrained. "You work for me. You're under my protection." "I'm your assistant," I corrected sharply, "not your property, and I certainly don't need protecting from a dinner date." His jaw clenched, that muscle jumping again. For a moment, I thought he might argue further, might push this confrontation into territory we couldn't come back from. Instead, he released my wrist abruptly, stepping back as if he'd suddenly become aware of how close we stood, how his behavior crossed every professional boundary. "You're right," he said, his voice returning to that carefully modulated tone I knew so well. "My apologies, Miss Chen. Your personal time is your own." But even as he spoke the words, his eyes told a different story. They tracked the movement of my hand as I smoothed my sleeve where he'd held me, lingered on the slight flush I could feel heating my cheeks, catalogued every minute reaction I tried to hide. I should have left then, should have taken the exit he'd offered and put distance between us. Instead, I heard myself say, "Was there a reason for your concern, Mr. Salvatore? Something work-related I should be aware of?" The question hung between us, challenging him to admit that this had nothing to do with work, that something had shifted in the dynamic we'd maintained so carefully for 2 years. His eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the trap I'd laid. "No," he said finally. "Nothing work-related." "Then I'll see you Monday morning." I turned toward the door, proud of how steady my legs felt, how normal my voice sounded. "Have a pleasant weekend, Mr. Salvatore." "Mia." I paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "Be careful." The words could have meant anything, could have been simple courtesy from employer to employee. But the way he said them, low and rough, suggested something else entirely. A warning, perhaps, or a promise that this conversation wasn't over. I left without responding, walking past Margaret's desk where she sat oblivious to the scene she'd triggered, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she hummed softly to herself. The elevator ride down felt endless, my reflection in the polished doors showing a composed professional woman, not someone whose wrist still tingled where Nico Salvatore had held it, whose mind was already questioning whether she should cancel that dinner reservation after all. The city sounds rushed in as I exited the building, car horns and distant sirens and the general hum of evening traffic. I pulled out my phone, staring at the reservation confirmation, my thumb hovering over the cancel button. The rational part of my brain insisted I was being ridiculous, that Nico's reaction meant nothing beyond an overbearing boss having a territorial moment. But the racing of my heart suggested something different. Suggested that in that office, something had fundamentally changed between us. That a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. And standing on the street corner as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, I realized that the most dangerous thing about Nico Salvatore wasn't his criminal empire or his cold calculations. It was the way part of me had wanted to stay when he told me I couldn't leave. The Italian restaurant was exactly what I'd expected from the reviews: warm lighting and checkered tablecloths, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce heavy in the air. My date, David, sat across from me talking about his work in marketing, his hands gesturing enthusiastically as he described some campaign he'd spearheaded. He was nice, conventionally attractive with sandy hair and an easy smile, exactly the kind of uncomplicated man I should be interested in. Yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the weight of Nico's hand around my wrist. "So then, the client completely changes their mind about the color scheme," David was saying, laughing at his own story. "Can you believe it? 3 weeks of work down the drain." I made an appropriate sympathetic sound, taking a sip of my wine. Through the restaurant window, I could see the street outside, people passing by in the evening light. A black sedan with tinted windows idled across the street, so unremarkable it should have been invisible. Should have been. But I'd learned to notice things in 2 years of working for Nico Salvatore. Learned to spot the security details that seemed like ordinary pedestrians, the expensive cars that appeared too frequently in the wrong neighborhoods, the men in suits who watched without seeming to watch. The sedan had been there when we arrived. Still there now, 30 minutes later. "Mia, did you hear what I said?" I forced my attention back to David, who was looking at me with slight concern. "I'm sorry. Long week. You were saying?" He smiled, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. The gesture was sweet, meant to be comforting. All I could think about was how different it felt from Nico's grip, lacking that electric current that had raced up my arm despite my better judgment. "I was asking if you wanted to share the tiramisu," David said. "Unless you're ready to call it a night?" Part of me wanted to say yes, to end this date that had felt wrong from the moment I walked out of the office. But stubbornness, the same trait that had kept me working for Nico when 3 assistants before me had quit, made me shake my head. Tiramisu sounds perfect. We shared dessert, David continuing to talk while I provided encouraging responses at appropriate intervals. I'd perfected this skill over the years, the art of seeming engaged while my mind worked through other problems. Like why Nico had reacted the way he did. Like whether that sedan outside was actually his security or my paranoia running wild. When the check came, David insisted on paying despite my protest. We stepped out into the cooling evening air, the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. The sedan was gone, I noted with a mixture of relief and something that might have been disappointment. "Can I walk you home?" David asked, his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the breeze. "Or get you a cab?" "I'm actually just a few blocks away," I said, which was true. "But thank you for dinner. It was lovely." He smiled, leaning in for what was clearly meant to be a goodnight kiss. I turned my head at the last second, his lips landing on my cheek instead of my mouth. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he recovered quickly. "Maybe we could do this again sometime." "Maybe," I said non-committal. "Have a good night, David." I walked away before he could press for a more definite answer, my heels clicking against the pavement as I headed toward my apartment. The streets were well lit, busy enough with Friday night foot traffic that I should have felt safe. Should have. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. 3 blocks from my building, I heard the footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, matching my pace too precisely to be coincidental. My hand tightened on my purse strap, mind racing through options. Run? Scream? Duck into one of the still-open shops? The footsteps quickened. So did my pulse. Then a familiar voice cut through my rising panic. "Miss Chen." I spun around to find Marco, one of Nico's security detail, standing several feet behind me. He was built like a wall, with a shaved head and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things most people only had nightmares about. In the 2 years I'd worked for Nico, Marco had been a constant presence, the shadow that followed his boss everywhere. "Marco." I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammering beneath my palm. "You scared me half to death. My apologies." He didn't sound particularly apologetic. "Mr. Salvatore asked me to ensure you got home safely." Of course he had. I felt anger spike hot and sudden in my chest, mixing dangerously with something that felt too much like pleasure at his concern. "I don't need an escort," I said sharply. "And you can tell Mr. Salvatore that his interference in my personal life is unwelcome and inappropriate." Marco's expression didn't change. "I'll be sure to relay your message, miss, after I see you safely to your door." There was no point arguing with Marco. He had his orders, and arguing with him would be like arguing with a brick wall, equally productive and twice as frustrating. I turned on my heel and continued walking, acutely aware of his presence several paces behind me. My apartment building was a modest walk-up in a decent neighborhood. Nothing like the luxury condos some of Nico's other executives lived in. I'd chosen it for its anonymity, its distance from the world Nico inhabited. Fat lot of good that had done me. At my building's entrance, I turned to face Marco. "You've completed your mission. I'm home safe. You can report back to your boss that his assistant didn't get murdered on her way home from a date." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Marco's face. "Have a good evening, Miss Chen." I watched him walk back toward the street where, sure enough, a black sedan waited. Not the same one from outside the restaurant, but close enough. The window rolled down as Marco approached, and even in the dim street lighting, I could see the figure in the back seat. Nico. Our eyes met across the distance, and even from here, I could feel the weight of his gaze. He'd been there the whole time, watching, making sure I was safe. The realization sent conflicting emotions warring in my chest, anger and confusion, and something dangerous that made my breath catch. He raised one hand in a gesture that could have meant anything, acknowledgement or apology, or simple goodbye. Then the window rolled up, and the sedan pulled away, leaving me standing on my doorstep with my heart racing and my mind reeling. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto my couch. the events of the evening playing on repeat in my head. Nico's hand on my wrist, his voice saying, "You're not going anywhere." The black sedan outside the restaurant, him waiting to make sure I got home safe. This was bad. This was crossing every professional boundary that kept my job functional and my life uncomplicated. I should be furious, should be drafting my resignation letter, should be making plans to put as much distance as possible between myself and Nico Salvatore. Instead, I found myself touching my wrist where he'd held me, remembering the heat of his palm, the intensity in his eyes when he told me to cancel my date. Found myself wondering what might have happened if I'd refused to leave his office, if I'd demanded he explain himself instead of retreating behind professional courtesy. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but I knew who it was even before I opened it. "Did you have a pleasant evening?" I stared at the screen, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to not engage, to maintain the distance that had kept us both safe for 2 years. Instead, I typed back, "Lovely, thank you," though the tiramisu was slightly disappointing. 3 dots appeared, indicating he was typing. Disappeared. Appeared again. I'll keep that in mind for future reference. Future reference. As if there would be future dates to monitor, future evenings to send security details to shadow me. As if tonight had opened a door that neither of us quite knew how to close. "Good night, Mr. Salvatore." "Good night, Mia." I set my phone down and stared at my ceiling, knowing sleep would be a long time coming. Knowing that Monday morning when I walked into his office, everything would be different. The careful distance we'd maintained had shattered the moment he grabbed my wrist, the moment I saw him waiting in that sedan. The question was what we'd build in its place. Monday morning arrived with rain, fat droplets streaking the windows of the train as I commuted into the city. I'd spent the weekend alternating between righteous anger at Nico's presumption and reluctant awareness that part of me had been gratified by his jealousy. Neither emotion was conducive to the professional distance I needed to maintain. I'd dressed with extra care, choosing a charcoal pencil skirt and white silk blouse, my hair pulled back in a severe bun that I hoped projected untouchable professionalism. War paint, my roommate had called it when I'd left the apartment, and she wasn't wrong. The office building loomed against the gray sky, all glass and steel and the illusion of legitimacy. I swiped my access card at the executive floor entrance, nodding at the security guard who'd witnessed 1,000 of my arrivals and departures over 2 years. Margaret was already at her desk in the outer office, her usual cheerful self despite the early hour. "Morning, Mia. How was your date Friday?" I managed what I hoped was a convincing smile. "It was fine. Nice restaurant." "Just fine?" She looked disappointed, as if she'd been hoping for a romance to unfold from her casual gossip. That's too bad. He seemed really interested when he called to confirm. Guilt pricked at me. David had been perfectly nice, had done nothing wrong except fail to be someone else. "We're just not a good match," I said diplomatically, moving toward Nico's office door. "Is Mr. Salvatore in yet?" "Got here an hour ago," Margaret said, lowering her voice conspiracially. "And he's been in a mood all morning. Snapped at Jonas from accounting, cut short his call with the Singapore office. Fair warning." Perfect. I steeled myself and knocked twice on his door before entering, not waiting for permission. 2 years had taught me that Nico respected boldness more than timidity. He sat behind his desk reviewing documents, immaculately dressed as always in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He didn't look up as I entered, but I saw his fingers still momentarily on the page he was reading. "Good morning, Mr. Salvatore." I kept my voice professionally neutral as I approached his desk. "I have your schedule for the week, and the revised contracts from the Garcia deal. Leave them." Still not looking up, that controlled voice giving nothing away. I set the folders down precisely where he liked them, then remained standing, waiting. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Rain continued to tap against the windows, a steady percussion that did nothing to ease the tension. Finally, Nico looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my carefully maintained composure waver. He'd been upset about something, Margaret said, and I could see it now in the slight tightness around his mouth, the rigidity in his shoulders. "How was your date?" The question was casual, but his hand had formed a fist on the desktop, knuckles white. "Perfectly pleasant," I replied, matching his tone. "Thank you for asking." "Pleasant." He repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "You left the restaurant with him." Not a question. A statement that confirmed what I'd suspected, that the surveillance hadn't ended with Marco walking me home. He'd had someone watching the entire evening, cataloging every moment. The anger I'd been suppressing since Friday flared hot in my chest. "Yes, Mr. Salvatore, I did leave a restaurant with my date. That's generally how dates work." "Did you invite him in?" The question came out harder than I think he intended, his control slipping just enough to reveal the jealousy beneath. I leaned forward, placing both palms flat on his desk, invading his space the way he'd invaded mine Friday evening. "What I do in my personal time is absolutely none of your concern. You are my boss, not my keeper. When it affects your safety, it becomes my concern." He stood abruptly, matching my aggressive posture. We were separated only by the width of his desk now, both breathing slightly harder than the conversation warranted. "My safety?" I let out a sharp laugh. "David works in marketing and volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends. The most dangerous thing about him is his dad jokes." "You don't know that." Nico's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "You don't know who he really is, who he might be connected to. And you do? You had him investigated?" The realization hit me like cold water. Of course he had. That's insane, Mr. Salvatore. That's controlling and invasive and completely inappropriate. It's necessary. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between us. "You work for me, Mia. You have access to sensitive information. Everyone who gets close to you is a potential security risk." "Then perhaps you should fire me," I shot back, refusing to retreat even as he stepped closer. "If I'm such a liability, such a weakness in your precious security, let me go." Something flickered across his face, an emotion too raw to be anger. "I can't." "Can't or won't," I challenged, tilting my chin up to maintain eye contact. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw despite the early hour. "Both." His hand came up, stopping just short of touching my face. "You think I haven't tried? You think I haven't told myself for 2 years that you're just an employee, replaceable, irrelevant?" The confession hung between us, his careful control finally cracking. I should have stepped back, should have retreated into professionalism. Instead, I found myself frozen, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "Then what am I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're—" He stopped, jaw clenching as he seemed to wage an internal war. "You're mine. Whether you acknowledge it or not, whether I have any right to claim it or not, you're mine, Mia." The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me, should have sent me running to human resources, to the nearest exit, to anywhere but here. Instead, it kindled something dangerous in my chest, something I'd been trying to ignore since Friday evening. "I don't belong to anyone," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Liar." His thumb brushed across my cheek, the touch so gentle it contradicted everything else about this moment. "You feel it too. This thing between us that we've been pretending doesn't exist." I wanted to deny it, to rebuild the professional walls that had kept us both safe. But standing here with rain drumming against the windows and his hand gentle on my face, The lies wouldn't come. "This is a terrible idea," I said instead, my last defense. "Probably." His other hand came to rest on my waist, pulling me incrementally closer. "But I stopped caring about that around the time I grabbed your wrist and watched you walk away anyway." "I should quit." The words lacked heat, came out more question than statement. "You should." His forehead lowered to rest against mine, our breath mingling in the narrow space between us. "But you won't." Arrogant. The accusation was half-hearted at best. Accurate. His lips brushed against mine, a whisper of contact that sent electricity racing down my spine. "Tell me to stop, Mia. Tell me this is just professional concern and walk out that door." But I couldn't, because he was right, damn him. This thing between us had been building for 2 years, simmering beneath every professional interaction, every late night alone in this office, every carefully maintained distance. Friday evening had just stripped away our ability to pretend otherwise. Instead of answering, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. His response was immediate and consuming, one hand sliding into my hair while the other tightened on my waist, pulling me against him. He kissed like he did everything else, with intensity and precision and absolute focus. I could taste coffee on his lips, feel the controlled strength in how he held me, careful not to hurt, but unmistakably possessive. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the professional distance that had defined our relationship lay in ruins between us. "This changes everything," I said, stating the obvious. "Yes." He didn't sound sorry about it, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw. "Does that scare you?" I thought about his world, the dangerous shadows beneath the legitimate facade, the black sedans and security details, and all the things I pretended not to know. Thought about the consequences of crossing this line with a man like Nico Salvatore. "Terrifies me," I admitted. "But apparently I'm doing it anyway." His smile was small but genuine, transforming his usually controlled features into something almost boyish. "That's what I've always admired about you, Mia. You're afraid, but you do it anyway." A knock at the door made us both freeze. We stepped apart hastily, Nico moving back behind his desk while I smoothed my hair and tried to calm my racing heart. "Come in," Nico called, his voice back to that controlled professional tone. Margaret poked her head in, oblivious to what she'd interrupted. "Sorry to disturb, but Mr. Chen from Hong Kong is online too. Says it's urgent." "Thank you, Margaret." Nico picked up the phone, then glanced at me. "Miss Chen, we'll continue this discussion later. Please clear my schedule for this evening." The formal use of my name in front of Margaret was jarring after the intimacy of moments before, but I understood the necessity. "Of course, Mr. Salvatore." I left his office on unsteady legs, returning to my desk in the outer office where I pretended to review emails, while my mind replayed the kiss, the confession, the irrevocable shift in our relationship. Margaret glanced over at me, then did a double take. "Your lipstick is smudged." I touched my mouth, felt the swollen sensitivity of my lips. Must have rubbed off on my coffee cup. She accepted the explanation without question, returning to her work while I pulled out a compact to fix my appearance. In the small mirror, my reflection showed flushed cheeks and bright eyes, all evidence of what had happened in Nico's office written clearly on my face. This was dangerous. This was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, mixing personal and professional in a workplace that already operated in moral gray areas. But as I caught Nico's eye through the glass wall of his office, saw the possessive satisfaction in his gaze, I realized that whatever warnings my rational brain tried to issue, my heart had already made its choice. I was falling for Nico Salvatore, and heaven help me, I was going to see where it led. 6 months can change everything. 6 months of stolen moments in his office after everyone else had left. Of dinners that weren't quite dates in restaurants far from anywhere we might be recognized. Of learning that the man I'd thought I knew was infinitely more complex than I'd imagined. The rain had given way to summer heat, the city shimmering under August sun as I stood in Nico's private apartment, staring out at the view he'd carefully shielded me from seeing until now. We'd been dancing around the full truth of his world for half a year, him protecting me from the details, me pretending I didn't see the signs. Tonight, apparently, the pretending ended. The Rossetti family has been moving into our territory. Nico's voice came from behind me, calm, despite the gravity of what he was saying. Small incursions at first, testing our response. Now they're getting bolder. I turned to face him. He'd removed his jacket and tie, the first 2 buttons of his shirt undone in a rare concession to the heat. But there was tension in his shoulders, worry in the way he held himself, that I'd learned to read over our months together. "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. I'd been noticing things lately, small changes in security protocols, men with harder eyes stationed in the building lobby, the way Nico's jaw would tighten when certain calls came through. It means that anyone connected to me becomes a potential target. He moved closer, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders. Anyone they could use to get to me or gain leverage. The implication settled over me like a weight. I'm a target. You've been a target since the moment I grabbed your wrist 6 months ago and made my interest clear. His voice held regret, anger at himself. I should have been smarter, should have kept more distance. But I was selfish, Mia. I wanted you too much to do the right thing. I reached up to cover one of his hands with mine. The right thing being what? Letting me walk away? Keeping you safe. The words came out rough, which I've failed to do by dragging you into my world. I knew what your world was, I said quietly. Maybe not all the details, but I'm not naive, Nico. I've known for 2 years what kind of business you really run. Surprise flickered across his face. You never said anything, because it wasn't my place. I was your assistant, not your conscience. I let my hand fall from his. But if we're doing this, if we're really together, then I need the truth. All of it. He studied my face for a long moment, seeming to weigh something. Then he nodded once, decisively. Sit down. This is going to take a while. What followed was a masterclass in the structure of organized crime, delivered in Nico's precise, analytical way. He explained the legitimate businesses that served as fronts, the network of relationships built on favors and fear, the careful balance of power that kept violence mostly theoretical rather than actual. It's not what movies make it out to be, he said, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey. Most of what I do is business, just business that operates outside legal frameworks. Protection, gambling, some controlled substances. I have rules, lines I won't cross. Like what? I asked, needing to know where his boundaries lay. No human trafficking. No harm to civilians who aren't in the game. No children ever involved. His voice hardened on the last point. Those are absolutes. Anyone in my organization who violates them answers to me personally. It should have been cold comfort, this code of ethics within criminality. But knowing Nico had lines, had principles he wouldn't violate even for profit, mattered more than I could explain. And the Rossetti family? I prompted. They have different rules. Or rather, no rules at all. He drained his glass, set it down with controlled precision. Which is why this situation is escalating toward violence. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I'd read enough, heard enough over 2 years to know what violence meant in this context. People disappeared, bodies turned up in rivers, families received the message that certain lines shouldn't be crossed. You're afraid they'll come after me, I said, understanding crystallizing. To hurt you. I'm certain they'll come after you." He turned from the window, his eyes intense. "They've already been asking questions, gathering information. They know who you are, what you mean to me." "What I mean to you," I repeated. We'd been careful not to define this thing between us, settling for stolen kisses and late-night conversations without ever putting a label on it. But standing here in his private space with the truth laid bare between us, labels seemed suddenly necessary. Nico crossed the room to kneel in front of where I sat, taking my hands in his. "You mean everything, Mia. You're the person I think about first in the morning and last at night. You're the reason I started looking for ways to legitimize my business, to build something that doesn't require constant vigilance and violence." My breath caught at the confession. "You're going legitimate? Since when?" "Since about 3 months ago, when I realized I might actually have a future worth planning for." His thumb stroked across my knuckles. "It's a slow process, but I've been transitioning operations, selling off the riskier ventures, reinvesting in legal enterprises." "Because of me?" The responsibility of that felt enormous. "Because of us." He leaned forward to rest his forehead against our joined hands. "I want to build something real, Mia. Something that doesn't require you to pretend not to know what I am. That doesn't put you at risk every time you walk out your door." I freed one hand to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "How long will the transition take?" "A year, maybe 2 if I'm careful about it." He looked up at me. "But the Rossetti situation complicates things. They see my withdrawal from certain operations as weakness, an opening to take over." "So you're caught," I said, understanding the impossible position. "If you don't push back, they'll see you as weak. But if you do push back, it means violence." "Exactly." He rose to sit beside me, one arm going around my shoulders. "Which is why I need you to consider leaving the city for a while, just until this is resolved." I pulled back to look at him directly. "Running away, you mean?" "Staying safe," he corrected. "I have a property upstate, secure, comfortable. You could work remotely, stay in touch via encrypted communications. While you deal with the threat." It wasn't a question. "While I protect what's mine." The possessiveness was still there in his voice, that claim of ownership that should have bothered me more than it did. "I can't focus on the business if I'm worried about your safety every second." I stood, needing space to think clearly without his proximity clouding my judgment. "Let me get this straight. You want me to hide while you handle a turf war with a crime family that has no rules and no conscience?" "When you say it like that, it sounds unreasonable," he said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It is unreasonable." I turned to face him. "I'm not going to hide in the countryside while you put yourself at risk. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work, Mia?" He stood as well, frustration finally breaking through his controlled facade. "Because from where I'm standing, keeping you alive is my top priority. And you being stubborn about it doesn't change that." "No, your top priority is handling this situation," I countered. "And you can't do that effectively if you're worried about me. So what if, instead of hiding, I learned to protect myself?" He stared at me as if I'd suggested something absurd. "Protection training takes months, years, to be effective. Then we start now." I moved closer, refusing to back down. "Teach me, or have someone teach me. Show me how to spot threats, how to react if something happens. Make me a partner in this instead of something fragile you have to hide away." For a moment he seemed poised to argue, to insist on his original plan. Then something shifted in his expression, a grudging respect mixing with the worry. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." I took his hands, squeezing them. "I'm not running, Nico. Not from the Rossettis. Not from your world, not from you. So either we figure out how to deal with this together, or we don't deal with it at all. That's not much of an ultimatum, he said, but his lips curved slightly. Since the second option isn't really an option. Exactly. I rose on my toes to kiss him, brief but firm. So when do we start? You realize what you're agreeing to, he said seriously. This isn't just self-defense classes. It's learning to think like someone who might want to hurt you, to be constantly vigilant, to see threats everywhere. I've been working in your office for 2 years, I reminded him. I've already learned to see threats everywhere. That surprised a genuine laugh out of him, the sound warming something in my chest. Fair point. All right, Mia. We'll do this your way. But you follow my lead on security protocols, no arguments. I can live with that. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since he started this conversation. Are you going to have to kill people? To resolve this? His expression shuddered, the weight of that question visible in how his shoulders tensed. I'm going to try very hard to avoid that outcome, but if it comes down to their lives or ours. He met my eyes directly. I'll do whatever's necessary to keep you safe, Mia. Whatever that requires. I nodded slowly, accepting this truth about the man I'd chosen. Nico Salvatore would kill to protect me, would cross lines most people never approached, would carry that weight without complaint or regret. It should have horrified me. Instead, it settled something in my chest, this absolute certainty that he would move heaven and hell to keep me safe. Then let's make sure it doesn't come to that, I said. Let's be smart about this, careful, and let's do it together. He pulled me close, his arms tight around me, face buried in my hair. You're too brave for your own good, you know that? Or maybe I just trust you enough to believe we can handle this. I tilted my head back to look at him. Together. Together, he agreed, and kissed me with an intensity that spoke of both promise and fear, of the dangerous path we'd chosen, and the certainty that neither of us would walk it alone. The next 3 months were an education in a world I'd only glimpsed from the edges. Nico assigned me a personal security detail, headed by Marco, who approached my protection with the same grim efficiency he applied to everything. I learned to check under my car for devices, to vary my routes home, to spot surveillance in crowds. I trained with a woman named Anna, who'd once worked for some government agency she wouldn't name. She taught me pressure points and escape techniques, how to use everyday objects as weapons, where to strike to incapacitate without hesitation. The training was brutal, left me bruised and aching, but I'd never felt more capable. Meanwhile, Nico navigated the increasingly tense situation with the Rossettis through a combination of strategic withdrawals and carefully calculated pushback. I watched him orchestrate moves and counter-moves like chess pieces, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the game. But the strain was showing. He slept less, smiled rarely, carried tension in his shoulders that wouldn't ease even when I tried to massage it away. The transformation of his empire from criminal to legitimate was proving more complicated than he'd anticipated, leaving him vulnerable in ways that the Rossettis were quick to exploit. Another warehouse hit, he said one October evening, staring at his phone with controlled fury. That's the 3rd this month. I set down the security protocols I'd been reviewing and moved to stand behind where he sat at his desk. My hands went to his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension beneath expensive fabric. Can you trace who leaked the location? I asked, already knowing the answer would complicate things. I have suspicions. His hand came up to cover one of mine. But proving it without starting a war inside my own organization is tricky. I'd learned enough over the months to understand the delicate balance he maintained. Loyalty bought through a mixture of respect, fear, and genuine care for his people. Accusing someone without proof could fracture that loyalty, create openings for the Rossettis to exploit. What if we fed different information to different people? I suggested. the strategy coming from my crash course in security thinking. See which version gets leaked. He turned in his chair to look at me, surprise, and something like pride in his expression. That's actually brilliant. Create a controlled leak to identify the source. I have a good teacher. I smiled, bending to kiss the top of his head. But Nico, we can't keep playing defense forever. Eventually, something has to give. I know. He pulled me around to sit on his lap, his arms encircling my waist. I'm working on it. There's someone I've been in contact with, someone with authority over the Rossettis. If I can arrange a meeting, negotiate a settlement. He trailed off, but I heard what he wasn't saying. Such a meeting would be dangerous, a potential trap. The Rossettis had already proven they didn't respect traditional rules of engagement. When? I asked simply. 3 days from now. Neutral location. Both sides agree to limited security only. His hand came up to cup my face. You'll stay here, in the penthouse. Marco and his team will have the building locked down. I started to argue, then stopped. This was the compromise we'd agreed on. Him trusting me to handle myself, me trusting his judgment on when situations were too dangerous. A meeting with the Rossetti leadership definitely qualified. Promise me you'll be careful, I said instead, pressing my forehead to his. I promise. He kissed me gently, then deeper, with an urgency that spoke to his own fears about the meeting. And when this is over, when we've dealt with this threat, I'm taking you somewhere far away for at least a week. No security details, no business calls, just us. Is that a promise too? I asked against his lips. It's a vow. We stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of his office while the city sparkled below us. I'd come so far from the assistant who'd tried to maintain professional distance, who'd thought keeping my head down would keep me safe. Now I was learning to fight, to think strategically, to exist in Nico's world, not as a liability, but as a partner. The 3 days before the meeting passed in careful preparation. Nico implemented my controlled leak strategy, feeding different warehouse locations to 5 different people in his organization. When the Rossettis hit the one provided to Vincent Cardosi, a captain Nico had suspected for months, the betrayal was confirmed. I watched from security footage as Nico confronted Vincent in one of their legitimate office buildings, the conversation too quiet to hear, but the outcome clear. Vincent walked out pale and shaking, immediately flanked by 2 of Nico's men. He'd be dealt with, though I didn't ask for specifics. Some details of Nico's world I'd decided were better left unknown. The morning of the meeting arrived with autumn rain, the same weather that had marked the day 6 months ago when everything between us had shifted. Nico dressed in one of his impeccable suits, checking the concealed holster at the small of his back with practiced ease. The agreement is no weapons, I reminded him from where I sat on the bed, watching his preparations. The agreement is, they don't see weapons, he corrected, adjusting the jacket to ensure the gun didn't show. There's a difference. Marco appeared in the doorway, similarly dressed, his presence somehow both reassuring and ominous. Car's ready, boss. Team's in position at the meet point. Nico turned to me, crossing the room in long strides. He cupped my face in both hands, his dark eyes intense. I'll be back in 3 hours. Marco's team is stationed throughout the building. You don't answer the door for anyone except me. Understood? Understood. I covered his hands with mine. Come back to me, Nico. Always. He kissed me hard, possessive, a promise and a claim. Then he was gone, Marco trailing behind him, leaving me alone in the penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its illusion of safety. I tried to work, to review documents and make phone calls, anything to keep my mind occupied. But I couldn't stop checking the time, calculating how long the meeting should take when I could reasonably expect him back. 2 hours passed, then 2.5. My anxiety ratcheted higher with each passing minute. When the 3-hour mark came and went with no word, I called Marco. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Nico's phone with the same result. Something was wrong. I paced the penthouse, my training kicking in automatically. Check exits, assess threats, prepare for possibilities. The security panel by the door showed the building's systems functioning normally, Marco's team still at their posts throughout the building. But Nico should have been back by now, should have called. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I grabbed it desperately. Hello? Miss Chen. The voice was unfamiliar, heavily accented. You are Mr. Salvatore's woman, yes? Ice flooded my veins. Who is this? Someone who has something you want, or rather, someone. A cruel laugh. Your Mr. Salvatore walked into our meeting very confident. But he forgot one important rule. Never trust a Rossetti. If you've heard him, I started, fear transforming instantly to fury. Oh, he's alive. For now. The voice took on a mocking tone. Whether he stays that way depends on you, Miss Chen. We need to meet, you and I, to discuss terms. I'm not making deals with you, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady even as my mind raced through options. Then Mr. Salvatore dies. Slowly, painfully, while you're safe in his penthouse. A pause. But I think you care too much to let that happen. I think you'll come to the address I'm about to give you. Alone. Within the hour. And then what? You kill us both? I was stalling, already moving toward where Nico kept emergency supplies. Maybe. Or maybe we make an arrangement. The voice hardened. 1 hour, Miss Chen. Come alone, or he dies. Tell anyone, or he dies. Bring security, or he dies. The choice seems simple, no? He rattled off an address in Brooklyn, a warehouse district I vaguely knew. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen for exactly 10 seconds, letting panic crest, and then forcing it down with the discipline Anna had drilled into me. Panic got you killed. Clear thinking kept you alive. I called Marco's direct line, still voicemail, tried 3 other members of the security team. Nothing. They'd been compromised somehow, taken out or bought off, which meant I was on my own. I moved with purposeful efficiency, changing into dark clothes, sturdy boots. From Nico's safe, I took the gun he'd shown me how to use, checked the magazine, flicked off the safety, and then back on. The weight of it in my jacket pocket was foreign, but oddly comforting. Anna's training ran through my head. Never go to a second location. But Nico was already at the second location, and leaving him there wasn't an option. Bring backup. But the Rossettis had proven they had eyes on us, would know if I tried to contact anyone. So I'd go alone, but not unprepared. I grabbed my phone, typed out a detailed message explaining the situation and the address I was heading to. Set it to send in 2 hours if I didn't cancel it, directed to 3 different people. Nico's attorney, his legitimate business partner, and the one police contact I knew wasn't on any criminal payroll. A dead man's switch. If I failed, at least the truth would come out. The drive to Brooklyn felt endless, my grip tight on the steering wheel of Nico's spare car, the one without tracking devices that he kept for emergencies. Rain continued to fall, washing the streets in silver light from the street lamps. The address led to a warehouse complex, several large buildings clustered together in various states of disrepair. I parked a block away, approaching on foot, the gun a reassuring weight against my ribs. The warehouse the Rossettis had specified had a small door standing open, light spilling out into the rainy night. An invitation. A trap. I stepped inside. The interior was mostly empty, just concrete floors and metal pillars supporting a high ceiling. At the far end, a group of men stood in a loose circle, and in the center, forced to his knees with blood running from a cut above his eye, was Nico. His eyes met mine across the distance, widening with horror and fury. "Mia, no." She came. The voice from the phone belonged to a thin man with cold eyes who stepped forward. How touching. How very, very stupid. "I'm here," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Let him go. Why would I do that? The man smiled, and I saw real cruelty there. Now I have both of you. Mr. Salvatore's woman and Mr. Salvatore himself. So many possibilities. One of the other men grabbed my arms from behind, metal clicking around my wrists. Handcuffs. I didn't struggle, saving my strength, waiting for an opening. They pushed me forward, forcing me to kneel beside Nico. His jaw was clenched, fury radiating from every line of his body. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't." His voice was rough. "Don't apologize for being too brave for your own good." The thin man circled us, clearly enjoying his moment of power. "Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Salvatore is going to sign over certain territories, certain operations. And to ensure his cooperation, we're going to keep Miss Chen as a guest, a very motivated guest." "No deal," Nico said flatly. "Then she dies first while you watch." The man pulled out a gun, pressed it to my temple. The cold metal against my skin sent terror shooting through my system, but I forced myself to stay still, to keep breathing. "Stop." Nico's control finally cracked. Fine. You win. I'll sign whatever you want." Now we're being reasonable. The man removed the gun from my head, and I could breathe again. "Bring the documents." But as one of his men moved to comply, I caught Nico's eye. Saw him glance deliberately at the knife one of their captors had missed on his ankle. Then his gaze flicked to my right pocket, where the outline of my gun must have been visible. Understanding passed between us, built on 3 months of training together, of learning to communicate without words. He'd create a distraction. I'd go for the gun. It would probably get us both killed. But it was better than the alternative. Nico moved first, using his bound hands to grab the ankle of the nearest guard, yanking hard. The man went down with a shout of surprise. I was already moving, rolling right, hands going for my pocket despite the handcuffs making the motion awkward. Gunfire erupted. I got the weapon free, flicked off the safety as I rolled, came up aiming at the thin man who'd held a gun to my head, pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked through my arms, but I saw him stumble back, red blooming on his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough. I swung toward the next target, but Nico was already moving, the ankle knife now in his bound hands, taking down the guard he'd tripped with brutal efficiency. It was chaos, noise, violence. Everything Anna had trained me for condensed into seconds. I fired twice more, taking down threats, protecting Nico's back as he fought to free himself. Then it was over. The Rossettis were down, dead or incapacitated. The warehouse filled with gun smoke and the ringing aftermath of shots. Nico stumbled toward me, blood on his shirt, though I couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. "Keys," he gasped. "One of them has keys for the cuffs." I found them on the body of a guard I'd shot, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock Nico's cuffs. Once free, he took the keys and unlocked mine, then pulled me against him, his arms crushing me close. "You weren't supposed to come," he said into my hair, anger and relief mixing in his voice. "I know." I was shaking now, adrenaline giving way to shock. But I did anyway. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone must have reported the shots. Nico pulled out his phone, made a call. "It's done. Brooklyn warehouse, address I'm sending now. Clean up crew and legal team immediately." When he hung up, he cupped my face in both hands. "You killed people tonight, Mia. To save me." I know. The weight of that was starting to settle, the reality of what I'd done. I'll have to live with that. We both will. He kissed my forehead, gentle despite the violence we'd just survived. But we'll live. That's what matters. The next hours passed in a blur of police statements, lawyers who'd clearly dealt with this kind of situation before. and Marco showing up pale and furious, explaining he'd been drugged. The whole security team had been, the Rossetti's reach more extensive than anyone had known. By dawn, Nico and I sat in his penthouse as rain continued to fall, wrapped in blankets despite the heat, processing everything that had happened. "The Rossetti leadership is dead," Nico said quietly. "What's left of their operation will collapse or be absorbed. It's over." "Is it?" I asked, leaning against his shoulder. "There'll always be someone else, another threat." "Maybe." He pulled me closer, but I meant what I said about going legitimate. "After tonight, I'm done, Mia. No more gray areas, no more violence. I'll finish the transition, sell off everything that isn't clean, and build something real." "That will take time," I pointed out. "About 2 years, I estimate." He tilted my face up to look at him. "Think you can put up with me that long?" "Only if you can put up with me." I managed a smile despite the exhaustion, the lingering shock. "I'm apparently terrible at following orders." "You're perfect at following your instincts," he corrected. "Even when they lead you into danger to save someone you love." Love. The word hung between us, finally spoken after months of dancing around it. "I do," I said simply. "Love you, I mean." "I know." His smile was soft, genuine. "You came into a warehouse full of armed men because of it. I can't think of better proof." We sat in silence as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Two people who'd survived the impossible, who'd fought and killed to protect each other, who'd emerged on the other side forever changed but somehow still together. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. I'd have to process what I'd done, the lives I'd taken. Nico would have to navigate the treacherous transition away from his criminal empire. We'd both have to learn how to exist in a world where the immediate danger had passed, where our relationship could be normal rather than forged in crisis. But standing there with his arms around me as a new day began, I knew we'd figure it out. Together. Just like we'd figured out everything else. Because that's what people do when they love each other enough to face down impossible odds, to change their entire world, to become something neither of them had expected. They survive, they adapt, and they build something worth surviving for. 2 years later, I stood in the same penthouse wearing a different expression, a different life written in the confident way I carried myself. The transformation of Nico's empire was complete. The last of the criminal operations sold off or dissolved, replaced by legitimate businesses that actually generated honest profit. It had been harder than either of us anticipated. Some of his people had refused to transition, choosing to join other organizations rather than go straight. Others had struggled with the change, needing training and support to operate in the legal world. But Nico had managed it with the same strategic brilliance he'd applied to his criminal enterprise, finding places for loyal people who wanted to change, cutting ties firmly with those who didn't. I'd left my position as his assistant 6 months after the warehouse, the conflict of interest too obvious once our relationship became public knowledge. Instead, I'd completed my degree in criminal justice, using my unique insider perspective to understand both sides of the law. Now, I consulted for prosecutors trying to understand organized crime structures, helping build cases against people like Nico had been. It was strange work, using knowledge I'd gained from loving a criminal to help bring down others. But Nico supported it, saw it as part of his own redemption. "You ready?" His voice came from behind me, and I turned to find him in the doorway, looking every inch the legitimate businessman in a tailored suit. Almost. I checked my appearance in the mirror one last time, smoothing the simple white dress I'd chosen for today. Just nervous. "About marrying me or about your mother meeting me?" He crossed to stand behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. "Both," I admitted. We'd kept our relationship relatively private over the past 2 years, focusing on the work of transformation rather than public declarations. Today's small ceremony would change that, would make us officially, legally bound together. Your mother will love me, he said with confidence I didn't quite share. I'm respectable now. Boring even. I laughed despite my nerves. You'll never be boring, Nico Salvatore. Nico Salvatore Chen, he corrected, reminding me we'd agreed to hyphenate our names. A small gesture, but one that mattered, showing this was a partnership of equals. The ceremony was small, just immediate family, and a handful of close friends gathered in the penthouse. My mother, who'd been skeptical of Nico when I first told her about him, had slowly warmed as she saw how he looked at me, how he'd changed his entire life to be someone worthy of that look. Marco stood as Nico's best man, the big man looking uncomfortable in formal wear, but genuinely happy for his boss, his friend. Anna was there too, the woman who'd taught me to survive, now teaching self-defense to women escaping dangerous situations. As I exchanged vows with Nico, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that first moment in his office when he'd grabbed my wrist and told me I wasn't going anywhere, through the danger and violence and impossible odds we'd faced, to this moment of peace and promise. I love you, he said, when it was time for his vows, his voice steady and sure. You made me want to be better, to build something worth having rather than taking. You saw the man I could be and refused to accept anything less. I love you, I replied, my voice catching with emotion. You taught me to be brave, to fight for what I wanted, to never settle for safe when I could have extraordinary. You became someone worthy of love, and I'm honored to give you mine. When he kissed me, sealing our promises, the small gathered group applauded, but I barely heard them, lost in the moment, in the certainty that we'd found something rare and precious, something worth every risk we'd taken, every line we'd crossed, every impossible choice we'd faced. That night, alone in the penthouse after everyone had left, Nico pulled me onto the couch where I'd once sat as his assistant, carefully maintaining professional distance. You know what I was thinking that day? He asked, his fingers playing with my wedding ring. When I grabbed your wrist and told you you weren't going anywhere? That you'd completely lost your mind? I suggested with a smile. That too. He kissed my knuckles, his eyes warm. But also that I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. Someone who saw through every carefully constructed wall I'd built and refused to be intimidated by what she found there. You found someone too stubborn to know better, I corrected. I found someone brave enough to love me anyway. He pulled me closer, his voice dropping to that low tone that still sent shivers through me. Even knowing what I was, what I'd done. Knowing what you could become, I replied. That mattered more. We sat in comfortable silence, the city spreading below us like a carpet of lights. 2 years ago, standing here had felt like standing at the edge of a dangerous precipice. Now it felt like home, like safety, like the foundation we'd built together. Any regrets? Nico asked quietly. I thought about it honestly, about the violence I'd witnessed and participated in, the moral lines I'd crossed, the way loving him had transformed me from a quiet assistant into someone capable of fighting for what she wanted. None, I said finally, meaning it completely. You? Only that I didn't grab your wrist sooner. He smiled against my hair. Think of all the time we wasted trying to maintain professional distance. That was you maintaining distance, I pointed out. I was perfectly content to keep things professional. Liar. His hand found mine, lacing our fingers together. You wanted this as much as I did. You were just smarter about hiding it. One of us had to be smart about it, I teased. Since you apparently decided possessive jealousy over a dinner date was the way to go. Best decision I ever made, he said unrepentantly. since it got you to finally look at me as something other than your boss. We stayed like that, as the city transitioned from evening to night. Two people who'd taken the hardest possible path to each other, but had emerged stronger for it. Our future wouldn't be without challenges. Nico's past would occasionally surface, requiring careful navigation. My work would sometimes bring me into contact with people who knew what he'd been, who judged us for his history. But we'd face it all together, the way we'd faced everything else. With honesty, with courage, and with the absolute certainty that what we'd built was worth protecting. "I love you, Mrs. Salvatore Chen," Nico murmured, as sleep started to claim us both. "I love you too," I replied, safe in his arms, in the life we'd fought so hard to build. My reformed criminal, my partner, my home. And in the quiet of that moment, with rain beginning to fall again outside the windows, I knew that despite all the unlikely twists that had brought us here, this was exactly where I was meant to be. With the man who'd once told me I wasn't going anywhere, and who'd proven it by becoming someone I never wanted to leave. 5 years. 5 years since that rain-soaked evening when Nico had grabbed my wrist and declared I wasn't going anywhere. 5 years of transformation, of building something real from the ashes of his former empire, of learning that love could be both fierce and gentle, demanding and giving. I stood in the marble lobby of the Salvatore Chen Foundation headquarters, watching construction workers put the finishing touches on what would become our legacy. The building itself was a statement, all glass and light, designed to be the opposite of the shadowy world Nico had once inhabited. Every beam, every window, every carefully chosen piece of art spoke to transparency, to hope, to second chances. "The conference room is ready for your walkthrough, Mrs. Salvatore Chen," Marcus said, appearing at my elbow. He'd transitioned from Nico's security detail to head of our foundation's operations, trading violence for logistics with the same fierce dedication he'd once applied to keeping us alive. I smiled at him, noting how he'd filled out since leaving the constant tension of Nico's former world. Marriage and a baby daughter had softened the hard edges, though I suspected he could still handle himself if necessary. "Thank you, Marcus. Is Nico still in the meeting with the board?" "Just finished. He's on his way down." Marcus checked his tablet, his new weapon of choice. "Also, Dr. Rivera from the Youth Mentorship Program called. She wants to discuss expanding to 3 more schools." Pride swelled in my chest. The mentorship program had been my idea, pairing at-risk youth with professionals who'd once walked similar paths. Former gang members turned business owners, ex-convicts who'd rebuilt their lives, people like Nico who understood the allure of easy money and the harder road of going legitimate. "Tell her I'll call her back within the hour," I said, making a mental note. "And make sure the press packet for tomorrow's opening ceremony includes the statistics on our job placement rate. 87% is something worth highlighting." "Already done." Marcus grinned. "You've taught me well." I laughed, remembering the early days when Marcus had looked at spreadsheets like they were written in ancient Greek. "You were motivated, learning foundation management, or going back to standing in lobbies looking intimidating. I like spreadsheets better than bullets," he said simply. "My daughter likes having a father who comes home every night." The elevator chimed, and Nico emerged, loosening his tie as he crossed the lobby. At 36, he'd grown into his legitimate power with the same confidence he'd once wielded his criminal authority. But there was a lightness to him now, a ease in how he carried himself that hadn't existed in those early days. His eyes found mine across the space, and even after 5 years of marriage, my heart still skipped at the intensity of his gaze. Some things never changed. "How was the board meeting?" I asked as he reached me, his hand automatically finding the small of my back. "Productive. They approved the expansion budget for the legal aid clinic." He pressed a kiss to my temple, a gesture of affection he'd once been too controlled to show in public. "And Margaret wants to know if we're still coming to her retirement party next week." "Margaret," who'd unknowingly triggered everything between us with her casual gossip about my dinner date. She'd worked another 3 years before deciding to retire to Florida, blissfully unaware of the chaos she'd catalyzed. "Of course we're going," I said. I already bought her gift, that first edition cookbook she's been talking about. "You're too good to her, considering she nearly got you killed by mentioning that date." Nico's tone was light, but I caught the shadow that crossed his face. Some memories never fully faded. "She also inadvertently gave me you," I reminded him, leaning into his solid warmth. "I'd say that balances out." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "I'll just go check on the catering setup for tomorrow." Once we were alone in the lobby, Nico pulled me closer, his voice dropping to that low tone that still sent shivers through me. "Have I told you today how incredible you are?" "Not in the last 3 hours," I replied, smiling up at him. I was starting to worry. "Can't have that." His thumb traced the line of my jaw. "You're incredible, Mia. This foundation, everything we've built, it's because of your vision, your refusal to let me take the easy way out." I thought back to those early conversations, when Nico had first mentioned going legitimate. It would have been easier to sell everything quickly, to wash his hands of his criminal empire and walk away. But I'd pushed for something more, for actively repairing the damage, for using his resources and knowledge to help others escape the life he'd led. "It's our vision," I corrected. "I just kept you honest about following through." "You kept me honest about a lot of things." He glanced around the lobby, taking in the inspirational quotes etched into glass panels, the photos of people we'd helped prominently displayed. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we actually pulled it off." "Getting sentimental, Mr. Salvatore Chen," I teased, though I felt it too. Tomorrow's opening ceremony would mark the official launch of our foundation's headquarters, the culmination of 5 years of work. "Reflective," he corrected. "There's a difference." My phone buzzed with a text from Anna, my former self-defense instructor who now ran our women's empowerment program. "Still on for lunch tomorrow before the ceremony? Want to go over the speech one more time?" I texted back confirmation, then looked up to find Nico watching me with that soft expression he reserved for moments when he thought I wasn't looking. "What?" I asked, just thinking about how far we've come. He took my hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that matched his. "Remember when you were terrified to be seen with me in public?" "I was terrified of a lot of things back then," I admitted. "Of your world, of the danger, of how much I was already falling for you, despite every logical reason not to." "And now?" I considered the question seriously. "Now I'm still cautious about certain things. We've made enemies in the process of shutting down operations, people who lost money when you went legitimate. And there are always those who resent success they didn't earn themselves." "But," he prompted, hearing the unspoken word. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of being with you, not of the foundation's visibility, not of building something that matters." I squeezed his hand. "We survived the worst already. Everything else is just details." A commotion at the entrance drew our attention. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23, stood arguing with the security guard, her voice rising with frustration. "I'm telling you, I need to see Mrs. Salvatore Chen. It's important." I recognized the desperation in her voice, had heard it countless times from the people who came to our foundation seeking help. I crossed the lobby before Nico could stop me. "I'm Mia Salvatore Chen," I said gently. "How can I help you?" The woman turned, relief flooding her features. She was thin, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. "My brother, he got caught up with some people. Bad people. They're forcing him to run drugs, and if he tries to leave..." She broke off, tears streaming down her face. I heard you help people get out of situations like this. Please. He's only 17. My heart clenched. 17, the same age I'd been when I'd left home for New York. Young and vulnerable and convinced I could handle anything the city threw at me. This could have been me, or my brother if I'd had one, or any of the countless kids who got caught in the machinery of organized crime. What's your name? I asked. Sophia Martinez. Okay, Sophia. Let's go somewhere private and you can tell me everything. I glanced at Nico, who nodded, his expression grim but understanding. This was what we did now, what the foundation existed for. An hour later, Sophia had told us her story. Her brother, Miguel, had fallen in with the remnants of a criminal organization that had tried to fill the vacuum Nico left when he went legitimate. They'd promised easy money, then used that promise to trap him in a cycle of debt and forced labor. The problem is extraction, Nico said after Sophia had left with promises that we'd help. We sat in his office, the one that overlooked the city, though the view was different now, less about surveying his territory, and more about seeing the community we served. If we just pull him out, they'll retaliate against the family. So we need to dismantle the entire operation, I said, already thinking through options. Do we have contacts in law enforcement who could help? Nico's expression was complicated. He'd spent 5 years building relationships with honest cops, with prosecutors who believed in second chances, with judges who were willing to give reformed criminals a fair shake. But asking for help still felt strange after decades of viewing law enforcement as the enemy. Detective Morrison, he said finally. She's handled several of our referrals. Might be willing to coordinate a larger operation if we can provide intelligence. I pulled out my phone, already composing a message. This was our dance now. The careful balance of using Nico's knowledge of criminal operations to help law enforcement without crossing back into the world he'd left behind. You know what I was thinking about during the board meeting? Nico asked suddenly, watching me type. How you wanted to escape and come find me, I teased without looking up. Always. The word carried weight, sincerity. But also about David. That made me look up. David, my dinner date from 5 years ago, the nice marketing executive whose only crime had been not being Nico. What about him? I had him investigated thoroughly, before you even finished your appetizer that night. Nico's expression was rueful. Found out everything about him, his college transcripts, his credit score, that he'd been engaged once before, and it ended badly because he worked too much. I know, I said gently. You told me all this years ago, but what I didn't tell you was that he was actually a good guy. Genuinely nice, stable, safe. Nico leaned back in his chair. Everything you should have wanted, everything that would have been better for you than getting tangled up with me. I set my phone down, giving him my full attention. Why are you bringing this up now? Because tomorrow we're opening this foundation, and there will be cameras and interviews, and people are going to ask how we built all this. He met my eyes. And the true answer is that I was jealous and possessive and completely irrational about you going on a date with someone else. I grabbed your wrist and essentially told you that you belonged to me, which was caveman behavior at best and deeply problematic at worst. I stood and moved around the desk to perch on the edge in front of him, my hand finding his. You're worried about how it looks. I'm worried about the example it sets, he corrected. We're supposed to be helping people escape controlling relationships, showing them healthy alternatives. And our origin story is me being possessive and controlling. Our origin story, I said slowly, is you recognizing something between us that I was trying to ignore, and being honest about it even though it was risky and inappropriate. Yes, you were possessive. Yes, you crossed professional boundaries. But you also gave me choices, respected when I pushed back, and spent 5 years proving that your possessiveness came from wanting to protect me, not control me. You're being generous. I'm being accurate. I squeezed his hand. Nico, if you'd actually tried to control me, to make my decisions for me, I would have left. You know that. But instead, you challenged me to be brave enough to want what I wanted, not what was safe or expected. He pulled me onto his lap, his arms encircling my waist. What you wanted being me, despite all logic suggesting otherwise. Exactly. I rested my forehead against his. And yes, it's complicated. Yes, there are parts of our story that aren't perfect models of healthy relationship dynamics. But we've also grown together, learned together, built something meaningful together. That's what matters. The Foundation's PR director is going to earn her salary figuring out how to frame this, Nico muttered, but he was smiling. Or we just tell the truth, I suggested, that relationships are messy and complicated, that people can change, that sometimes the right person shows up in the wrong way, and you have to figure out how to build something good from imperfect beginnings. I love you, he said, the words still carrying the same intensity they had the first time he'd spoken them. Even when you're being entirely too reasonable about my past bad behavior, someone has to be. I kissed him softly. Besides, I wasn't exactly passive in all this. I could have quit, could have reported you to HR, could have run the moment things got dangerous. But I chose to stay, chose to fight beside you, chose to build this life with you. That's on me as much as your initial possessiveness is on you. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city spreading below us. Tomorrow this office would be full of people, reporters, and beneficiaries of our programs, board members and donors. But right now, it was just us, the way it had been in stolen moments throughout our relationship. Miguel Martinez, Nico said finally, returning to the problem at hand. I'll make some calls, see what can be done. But Mia, we can't save everyone. I know. It was a lesson I'd learned painfully over the past 5 years. For every Sophia who came to us in time, there were others who didn't, who got lost in the system, or made choices we couldn't prevent. But we can save him, and that matters. Nico nodded, already pulling out his phone. I slid off his lap and returned to my own office across the hall, where my assistant had left the final schedule for tomorrow's events. My office was smaller than Nico's, but decorated to my taste, with photos from our foundation's success stories lining one wall, former gang members who'd started businesses, women who'd escaped trafficking and rebuilt their lives, kids who'd aged out of foster care and found stable housing and employment through our programs. Each photo represented a choice, someone deciding to take the harder road towards something better. It reminded me why we did this work, why the long hours and occasional setbacks mattered. My phone rang, Jenna's name flashing on the screen. My best friend, the one I'd meant to text that ultrasound to all those years ago, calling from her office in London, where she'd built her own career in international law. Please tell me you're not calling to cancel on tomorrow, I said, by way of greeting. Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss your big moment for anything. I could hear the smile in her voice. I'm actually calling to give you a heads up. Remember that article I mentioned? The journalist who wanted to do a deep dive on former criminal enterprises going legitimate? My stomach sank. Please tell me she's not coming tomorrow. She's coming tomorrow, Jenna confirmed. But listen, I've read her work. She's fair, thorough. This could actually be good publicity if you handle it right. Or it could be a disaster that dredges up everything Nico's spent 5 years trying to move past, I countered, already mentally calculating damage control strategies. Which is why you're going to be honest with her, Jenna said firmly. Tell your story, the real one. People respect authenticity, Mia. And what you and Nico have built is genuinely impressive. We talked for a few more minutes, Jenna sharing stories about her own life, her recent promotion, the man she was dating who might actually be serious. The normalcy of it grounded me, reminded me that despite everything unusual about my relationship with Nico, We were still just people trying to build good lives. After hanging up, I reviewed the speech I'd written for tomorrow's ceremony. It was safe, professional, hitting all the right notes about second chances and community investment. But Jenna's words echoed in my mind. People respect authenticity. I opened a new document and started writing again, this time from the heart. An hour later, Nico found me still typing, completely absorbed. "It's after 8, he said, setting a takeout container on my desk. "You need to eat." I saved the document and looked up at him. "I'm rewriting my speech for tomorrow." "Why? The version you showed me last week was perfect." "It was safe," I corrected, "professional and polished and completely impersonal." "But that's not who we are, Nico. This foundation exists because we took risks, because we were willing to be vulnerable, because we believed people deserved honesty about the messy process of change." He sat across from me, interest evident in his expression. "What are you proposing?" "That we tell our story, not the sanitized version, but the real one. How we met, how we fell for each other despite every reason not to, how we fought to build something better than what came before." I leaned forward. "People need to know that change is possible but not easy, that you can come from a dark place and still build something worth having." "You want to talk about my criminal past at the Foundation's opening ceremony?" he said slowly. "I want to talk about your present," I clarified. "About the work you've done to transform not just your businesses but yourself. About how redemption is real, but requires actual effort, actual sacrifice, actual change." Nico was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "This journalist Jenna mentioned, she's going to dig into everything anyway. The Foundation, my past, how we met, all of it." "Exactly. So we control the narrative by being upfront about it." I opened the new speech file and turned my laptop so he could read it. He scanned the words I'd written, his expression impossible to read. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like awe. "You're really going to stand up tomorrow and tell hundreds of people that you fell in love with a mob boss?" "Former mob boss," I corrected with a slight smile. "And yes, I am. Because I'm not ashamed of our story, Nico. It's unconventional and complicated, and probably not what most relationship experts would recommend. But it's ours. And it led to something good." He stood and circled the desk, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. "Have I mentioned recently that you're the bravest person I know?" "Not in the last few hours," I replied, echoing our earlier exchange. "Well, you are." He kissed me softly. "And I love you for it. But Mia, are you sure about this? Once we put it out there, we can't take it back. People will judge, will question, will use our past against the Foundation's work." "Let them," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We have 5 years of proof that change is possible, that people can build something legitimate from illegitimate beginnings. Our foundation has helped over 3,000 people start new lives. That's what matters, not the perfect origin story." Nico rested his forehead against mine, his voice dropping to that intimate tone. "When I grabbed your wrist that day and told you that you weren't going anywhere, I had no idea you'd end up being the one keeping me from going anywhere. From sliding back, from taking shortcuts, from being anything less than someone worthy of you." "We kept each other," I said simply. "That's how it works." We stood like that for a while, holding each other in the quiet of the office, the city lights twinkling below us. Tomorrow would bring cameras and questions, challenges, and probably some criticism. But we'd faced worse and survived. Together. The opening ceremony dawned bright and clear, autumn sunlight streaming through the Foundation's glass walls and illuminating everything with golden light. I stood backstage in the auditorium we'd built for events like this, listening to Marcus give the welcome remarks, my revised speech clutched in slightly damp hands. "You'll be brilliant," Nico murmured beside me, his hand finding mine. "I'm terrified," I admitted. What if this backfires? What if being honest about our past damages the Foundation's credibility? "Then we'll rebuild that credibility the same way we built everything else," he said firmly. "Through action, through results, through showing up every day and doing the work." Marcus introduced me, and I walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The auditorium was packed. Donors and board members in the front rows, program participants and community members filling the back, reporters scattered throughout with cameras and recorders ready to capture every word. I reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, finding Nico in the front row. He nodded once, encouragement and support in that simple gesture. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I was working as an executive assistant in a legitimate business that concealed something much darker. I kept my head down, did my job, and pretended not to notice the shadows beneath the surface. I told myself that if I maintained professional distance, if I stayed invisible, I'd be safe. The room had gone very quiet, everyone leaning forward to hear what came next. Then one day, my boss, the man who would become my husband, crossed every professional boundary and told me I wasn't going anywhere. It was possessive, it was inappropriate, and it was the beginning of the most important relationship of my life. I saw some surprised expressions, a few knowing smiles from people who'd heard parts of our story. The journalist Jenna had mentioned was in the third row, recording every word. I'm telling you this not to romanticize problematic behavior, but to be honest about the messy reality of how change happens. Love, real love, doesn't always arrive in neat packages with perfect timing. Sometimes it shows up in complicated, imperfect ways, and you have to decide whether to run from it or work to build something better from flawed beginnings. I paused, taking a sip of water, gathering my thoughts for the next part. My husband spent 15 years building a criminal empire. He made money through illegal means, operated outside the law, hurt people in the process of protecting his territory. These are facts, and we don't hide from them. But here's what else is true. 5 years ago, he made a choice to change. Not because he was caught, not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something legitimate, something that could help others, instead of exploiting them. Nico's expression remained composed, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. This was hard for him, having his past laid bare in front of hundreds of people. But he'd agreed to it, trusted me to tell our story in a way that mattered. That choice wasn't easy, I continued. It meant walking away from millions of dollars in profitable operations. It meant making enemies of former associates who saw his transformation as betrayal. It meant years of hard work, building legitimate businesses from scratch, earning trust from people who had every reason to distrust him. I looked directly at the journalist, making sure she understood the next part. And it meant proving, every single day, that change is possible. That someone's past doesn't have to define their future. That redemption isn't about erasing what came before, but about building something better going forward. The applause started slowly, then built, filling the auditorium with sound. I waited for it to quiet before continuing. This foundation exists because we believe in second chances. Not easy chances, not free passes, but genuine opportunities for people willing to do the work of transformation. We've helped former gang members start legitimate businesses. We've provided job training for people with criminal records. We've offered legal aid to those navigating the complicated process of rebuilding their lives. I pulled out the statistics I'd had Marcus prepare, the concrete proof of our impact. In 5 years, we've served over 3,000 individuals. Our job placement rate for program graduates is 87%. 93% of the youth in our mentorship program have avoided any involvement with criminal activity. 78% of the women who've come through our empowerment program report feeling safer and more financially stable than before. More applause, genuine and enthusiastic this time. These numbers matter because they represent real people making real changes. But behind every statistic is a messy, complicated story. Someone who made mistakes. Someone who got caught in circumstances beyond their control. Someone who needed help and found it here. I glanced at Sofia Martinez, sitting in the 5th row beside her brother Miguel. Detective Morrison had come through, dismantling the operation that had trapped him, and Miguel was now enrolled in our youth program, learning skills that would keep him employed and out of trouble. So, yes, my origin story with my husband is unconventional. Yes, it involves someone from a criminal background declaring possessive interest in someone who should have run the other direction. And yes, we've had to work incredibly hard to build something healthy from those complicated beginnings. I smiled, feeling the truth of what I was about to say settle into my bones. But that's exactly why we understand the people we serve. We know what it's like to want something better, but not know how to get there. We know what it takes to change course, to leave behind what's familiar and profitable for what's harder, but more meaningful. We know that transformation is possible, because we've lived it. The final round of applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet. I saw Jenna in the back row, tears streaming down her face, pride evident in her expression. Anna gave me a thumbs up. Marcus was grinning broadly. And Nico? Nico looked at me like I'd just performed a miracle. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of ribbon cutting and facility tours, of handshakes and congratulations, of the journalist pulling me aside for a more extended interview. I answered her questions honestly, not shying away from the complicated parts, trusting that transparency would serve us better than evasion. By the time the last guest departed and the catering staff was cleaning up, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I found Nico on the foundation's rooftop terrace, looking out at the city as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and violet. That was quite a speech, he said as I joined him at the railing. Too honest? I asked, suddenly uncertain now that the adrenaline had faded. Perfect. He pulled me against his side, his arm settling around my shoulders. You told our truth without apology, and you made it matter. Made it mean something beyond just our story. The journalist wants to do a follow-up piece, I said. An in-depth look at the Foundation's work, and how your background informs it. I told her we'd consider it. We should do it, Nico decided. You're right about controlling the narrative through honesty. Let her see the work, talk to the people we've helped. The truth is powerful enough on its own. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city transition from day to night. Below us, the Foundation's lights glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon for people seeking second chances. Do you ever miss it? I asked quietly. The power, the money, the adrenaline of the life you left behind? Nico considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, he admitted. When problems could be solved with money or force, when moral ambiguity made decisions easier. But then I think about what I have now, this foundation, our marriage, the ability to sleep at night without wondering who's planning to betray me. No, Mia, I don't miss that life. This one is infinitely better. Even though it's harder? Especially because it's harder. He turned me to face him, his hands framing my face. Easy things have never been as valuable as difficult ones. And building something legitimate, something that helps people, something I can be proud of, that's worth every sacrifice. I rose on my toes to kiss him, soft and lingering, a promise and an affirmation. After 5 years, he still made my heart race, still challenged me to be braver than I thought possible, still looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. Let's go home, I said when we finally pulled apart. We have an early meeting tomorrow with the school board about expanding the mentorship program. Always more work to do, he said, but he was smiling. Always, I agreed. That's what happens when you build something real. It requires constant effort, constant attention, constant choice to keep showing up and doing the work. As we walked back through the foundation's halls, turning off lights and setting the security system, I thought about how far we'd come. From that first possessive declaration in his office to this partnership we'd forged. From his criminal empire to this legitimate foundation. From fear and uncertainty to confidence and purpose. The path had been messy and complicated, full of moments that didn't fit the fairy tale narrative most people wanted from their love stories. But it was ours, authentic and hard-won, built on honesty and mutual transformation. And standing in the foundation's lobby with Nico's hand in mine, looking at the photos of lives we'd helped change, I knew that every risk had been worth it. Every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice we'd made to build something better than what came before. Because this foundation, this marriage, this life we'd created together, was proof that people could change. That second chances were real. That love, the complicated, messy kind that required work and honesty and constant choice, was the most powerful force for transformation in the world. Nico locked the door behind us, and we walked to where our car waited, the driver respectfully maintaining distance to give us privacy. "You know what I was thinking during your speech?" Nico asked as we settled into the back seat. "That I was going to give your PR director a heart attack?" I guessed. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That too. But also that 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing in a foundation headquarters, listening to my wife publicly discuss my criminal past as part of a redemption narrative, I would have thought they were insane. And now I think it's the sanest thing I've ever done." He laced his fingers through mine. "Choosing you, choosing this life, choosing to become someone worthy of the faith you've shown in me. Best decisions I ever made." "Even better than telling me I wasn't going anywhere?" I teased. "That was just the beginning," he said, his eyes warm in the passing streetlights. "Everything good in my life came from that moment of possessive irrationality. You, this foundation, the chance to actually make amends for the harm I caused. All of it traces back to refusing to let you walk away." "Lucky for both of us, I'm too stubborn to stay walked away from," I replied. "Lucky for both of us," he agreed, and kissed me with the same intensity he'd shown 5 years ago, when he'd first admitted what I meant to him. As we drove through the city toward home, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. From that rainy evening when everything changed to this moment of hard-won peace. From fear and uncertainty to confidence and purpose. From two people caught in impossible circumstances to partners building something meaningful. It wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't a safe story. But it was real, and it was ours. And that made it more valuable than any fairy tale could ever be. Because the best stories, the ones that actually matter, are the ones where people choose to become better than they were, to build something good from flawed beginnings, to love each other enough to do the hard work of transformation. And that's exactly what we'd done.